It all started with a white SUV. I didn't think much of it the first time. It was early morning, and I figured someone had visitors. The vehicle wasn't blocking me in, and I had errands to run, so I let it go. But then it happened again. And again. Same car. Same spot. Asterisk, asterisk, my asterisk, asterisk driveway. By the fourth time, I was sure. It wasn't a mistake. This person was using my property like her own personal parking lot. I left a note on the windshield. Polite, direct. Please don't park here. This is private property. I even signed it with my name and address, just in case there was any confusion. The note was gone the next day. But the car? Still there. Not a word from the driver. Then I saw her, pulling in, sunglasses on like she owned the world. I walked out to meet her, calmly. Hey, I said, this is my driveway. You can't keep parking here. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look surprised. She just said, this is community space. You can't claim it. I stared at her for a second, not sure if she was serious. She was. Her tone was matter-of-fact, like I was the one being unreasonable. I told her I owned the lot, house, front lawn, driveway, all mine. I offered to show her the documents. She waved me off. I know the HOA rules. This neighborhood was built with shared access in mind. You're lucky we don't ticket you for blocking it. I laughed. I thought she was joking. But no, she was dead serious. Turns out, she was the president of our HOA board. One of those people who think a clipboard and a title means they control everything they see. I had lived here longer than she had, but now she was trying to rewrite the neighborhood like it was her own little kingdom. The next week, the car was parked there every day, sometimes half on the lawn. Once, right across the driveway, blocking my truck entirely. I had to call a friend to come pick me up that morning for work. I emailed her again, calm, firm. You're trespassing. I've asked you to stop. This is not HOA property. She didn't respond. Instead, I got a notice in my mailbox, asterisk, asterisk, a violation letter, asterisk, asterisk for placing unauthorized signage on HOA-managed grounds. The sign? My note, on my windshield, on my driveway. That's when I knew it wasn't just personal. It was power. She wasn't parking there out of convenience. She was doing it to prove she could, to make a statement. The HOA runs a neighborhood, and if you don't play along, they'll make your life difficult. So I printed the property plat, highlighted the parcel boundaries, and brought it to the next HOA meeting. I read out loud where it said, private access, single residential parcel. I pointed at the highlighted lines. This is mine, I said, not shared, not communal, mine. She rolled her eyes in front of everyone. The board has the right to interpret usage, she said. You should be more neighborly. I looked around the room. A few neighbors nodded in agreement with her. Others stayed silent. No one spoke up. They were scared, I could tell. The HOA had been running this place with iron gloves for years. People got fined for leaving trash bins out for an extra hour. One guy got a citation for planting sunflowers too close to his walkway. No one wanted to be the next target, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't backing down. The next morning, her car was there again, parked sideways this time, blocking me from even opening my garage door. That's when something inside me snapped. Not in rage, but in clarity. If she loved my driveway so much, if she really believed she had a right to it, then maybe she should keep it. And once I had that thought, everything else fell into place. I didn't act right away. I gave her one more chance. That afternoon, I sent a final email. This one wasn't friendly or patient. It was clear, direct, and backed with every bit of legal proof I had. Attached with property plat, a copy of my deed, and a highlighted section of our local zoning code showing exactly where private ownership ended and public access began. I added one line at the bottom. If your car is on my driveway again, I will treat it like it belongs to me. She never replied. The next morning, guess what I saw when I opened my blinds? The same white SUV. Front tires pressed against my garage like it lived there. I stood there, coffee in hand, staring at it. My driveway, her car, my property, her attitude. She had made her choice. So I made mine. I headed to the hardware store and loaded up my truck with everything I needed. Bags of fast-drying concrete, a bucket, and a trowel. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't angry. In fact, I was calm. This wasn't an act of rage. This was an act of finality. When I got back, her car was still there. Of course it was. I gave myself about an hour to prepare. I lined the area carefully, just enough room around the tires to make sure I wasn't damaging the vehicle, just trapping it. That's all I wanted. I wasn't trying to destroy it. I was just making sure it wouldn't go anywhere. I mixed the first batch of concrete slowly, just like I practiced when I laid my patio. Then I poured it in sections, neat, controlled, deliberate, around all four wheels. I left a precise inch of clearance around the base of the body. It wasn't sloppy. It was clean, tight, and very, very permanent. By the time I was done, her SUV looked like it had sunk into the earth, anchored, immovable, and right where she insisted it had the right to be. Then I taped a laminated letter on the windshield. It read, "This car is located on private property. Trespassing warnings were issued and ignored. Vehicle has been secured until legal owner contacts property owner directly." And that was it. I didn't call the cops. I didn't post online. I just went inside and waited. She showed up around lunchtime. I heard the screech before I saw her, those brakes slamming as she pulled into the cul-de-sac. Then came the shouting. Loud, angry, ridiculous. She banged on my door like a toddler throwing a tantrum. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched from my window as she paced in circles around her car, talking on the phone, yelling into the wind. A few neighbors peeked out from their porches. One even took a picture. She spotted them and screamed about lawsuits and criminal damage, waving her arms like someone had set her house on fire. Eventually, she called the police. I heard her tell them I had vandalized her vehicle and poured concrete without consent. The officers arrived a few minutes later. They were calm, clearly used to HOA drama. They knocked. I opened the door and handed them the same packet I'd sent her, property documents, emails, warnings, photos, everything. The officers reviewed it all on my front porch. One of them turned to her and said, "Ma'am, the driveway is clearly private property. He sent you multiple notices. This is a civil issue." She went pale, then red. "You're just going to let him get away with this?" she shrieked. The officer shrugged. "We don't enforce civil disputes. And he hasn't damaged your vehicle. You might want to contact your HOA attorney." That was the last thing she wanted to hear. She stormed off, phone to her ear again, barking into the receiver. But the car? It wasn't going anywhere. That's the thing about concrete. It doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It just stays. And that SUV, parked right in the spot she fought so hard to claim, was finally going to sit still for a while. By the next morning, the SUV had become the most talked-about landmark in the entire neighborhood. Not a single person walked by without slowing down to stare. Some just shook their heads in disbelief. Others smirked, clearly enjoying the fallout. A few even stopped to take photos. But no one dared say anything to me. Not one person. That's when I realized something. I wasn't the only one who had been dealing with her. Apparently, the HOA president had been playing these petty control games with multiple homeowners for years. One neighbor told me she got a violation for having a wreath on her door 2 days after the season changed. Another said they were fined for improper curtain color, seen through their window from the street. She didn't lead the HOA, she ruled it. But not anymore. The white SUV sat there for days, its wheels cemented into my property like a monument to arrogance. She tried everything. First, she called another tow company, but they refused to take the job once they saw the concrete. Said it was too risky. They weren't going to ruin their equipment trying to rip a car out of a slab. Then came the HOA lawyer. I got a certified letter threatening legal action for unlawful immobilization of a board member's vehicle. I didn't flinch. I sent back a legal response to a friend of mine. He's a real estate attorney. The reply included a photo timeline, copies of all my emails, the violation notices she'd sent me, and even a time-stamped video of her car being parked after my final warning. And that's when the letter stopped being a threat and turned into silence. For 2 full weeks, She didn't show her face. The SUV sat there like a busted statue, and word started spreading faster than I could keep up with it. People began knocking on my door, not to complain, but to thank me, quietly, cautiously, as if they still weren't sure it was okay to speak out against her. One guy even brought me a six-pack and said, "You don't know how long I've waited to see someone take a stand." He wasn't wrong. That driveway had become something bigger than concrete and tires. It was a line in the sand. A clear message that the HOA wasn't untouchable, and neither was she. Then, right when I thought she might cave, she came back. She marched up a man in a suit, probably another lawyer, and they both walked the perimeter of my property, pointing and murmuring like they were preparing for battle. I just stood on my porch, arms crossed, not saying a word. After about 20 minutes, the man walked over and introduced himself as a mediator. He started talking about compromise and mutual understanding. I listened carefully, then asked one question. Did she agree to admit what she did was wrong? He paused, looked back at her, then said, "We're not here to assign blame." And that's when I smiled and told him the conversation was over, because this was never about revenge. It was about principle. If she parked there by mistake once or twice, this wouldn't have happened. But she had done it on purpose. Again and again, she had ignored my warnings, laughed off the documents, and even weaponized her position to try and shut me down. She had counted on fear to keep people in line. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Later that week, she sent me an email. No greeting. No apology. Just one line. "What will it take for you to remove the concrete?" I stared at it for a long time before replying. Then I typed 7 words and hit send. Start by resigning from the HOA board. That was it. No demands. No negotiation. Just a clear offer. I didn't hear back for days. But the SUV still hadn't moved. And every single time I walked by it on my way to get the mail, I smiled a little bigger. Because whether she liked it or not, that driveway finally belonged to the right person again. A few more days passed, and the silence grew louder. No more emails. No more lawyers. No sudden HOA meetings. It was like she'd disappeared from her own little empire. But her car was still right there, locked in place, front wheels sunken into concrete, like it was part of the landscaping now. Neighbors kept passing by, slower than usual. Some smiled. Some gave me a little nod, like we shared a secret. I had no interest in rubbing it in, but I wasn't exactly hiding either. I was in my garage fixing up shelves when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. It was Diane, the HOA secretary, the one who always looked like she had just bitten into a lemon. She stepped into the garage like she was walking into enemy territory. She sent me, Diane said. I didn't even have to ask who. "She's not going to resign," she continued, "but she wants to settle this." I leaned against the workbench and waited. She says, "If you remove the concrete, she'll agree to issue a public statement acknowledging misunderstandings," Diane added. "Misunderstandings," I repeated, keeping my voice even. "Not trespassing, not abuse of authority, just a misunderstanding." Diane looked uncomfortable. She glanced back toward the sidewalk like she wanted to run. "Look, we all know this has gotten out of hand. The board's getting pressure. People are talking about recall." I shrugged. "Let them." She hesitated, then added, "She's willing to pay for the removal, too." I stepped forward just enough to make sure she didn't miss the point. "Tell her this. I don't want her money. I don't want her excuses. I want her gone. Out of the HOA. No tricks. No face-saving statements. Just done." Diane nodded slowly and walked off. That night, I got a message from a neighbor, Luis. He had served on the HOA board a few years back, before quitting out of personal conflict, which apparently meant couldn't stand working with her. He said a group of homeowners was putting together paperwork for a vote to remove her. All they needed were signatures. 51% of the community. He asked if I'd help spread the word. Of course, I said yes. The next day, I printed out copies of the recall petition. Not a fancy campaign, just straight facts. The violations of trespassing, the misuse of authority. I didn't need to add emotion. Everyone already had their own story. It wasn't about my driveway anymore. It was about the way she ran the whole neighborhood, like a private kingdom. By that weekend, word had spread like wildfire. People who had never spoken to each other were suddenly swapping stories at the mailboxes. A retired couple told me she threatened to fine them for building a ramp for their grandson's wheelchair. Another guy said she ordered his work van towed, even though he had gotten written approval for it months earlier. Each story was worse than the last, and with each one, more signatures filled the page. By Monday, we had 60% of the neighborhood behind it. The vote was locked in. The petition was turned over to the Oversight Committee, and a special election date was announced. Suddenly, the once all-powerful HOA president was scrambling. Flyers went out saying the board was under attack by an angry minority. She even tried holding a town hall in her backyard, but only 4 people showed up, and 2 of them were just curious. The tide had turned. A week later, she stepped down. No statement, no apology, just a 1-line email to the board. Effective immediately, I resign. When the news got out, people started clapping. I'm not kidding. Actual applause in the middle of the street. One neighbor rolled his trash bin down his driveway with a cheer like his team had won the Super Bowl. But even with her gone, the SUV stayed. She still hadn't come back for it. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was shame. Or maybe, deep down, she knew it belonged there now. Stuck in place, surrounded by concrete, a permanent reminder of how far control can go before it collapses. The funny thing about power is how quickly it disappears when people stop pretending it's real. After her resignation, the entire neighborhood seemed to exhale at once. The silence that had hung over us for so long, fueled by fear, fines, and HOA letters in red ink, was replaced with conversation. People who used to avoid each other started chatting again. The ones who used to rush back inside after pulling in their trash bins now lingered a little longer at the mailbox. There was laughter on the sidewalks again. It wasn't just about the car or the concrete. It was about finally feeling like we could live in our own homes without being watched. Still, the SUV sat there. Every morning I'd go out for coffee, and there it was, just sitting. For wheels still neatly sunk into the concrete, I poured with my own hands. It had gone from neighborhood nuisance to neighborhood icon. I started getting weird looks from delivery guys. One asked if it was an art installation. Even though the HOA president was gone, nobody came for the vehicle. She didn't hire a crew. She didn't send a tow. Nothing. Just silence. And that's when the letters started. Not from her. From people in other neighborhoods. Word had gotten out. How could it not? Someone posted photos in a Facebook group for HOA homeowners, and it blew up. Within a week, I was getting messages from strangers in other cities, thanking me for doing what they wished they could. Some of the stories were even worse. People fined for flags, losing access to their driveways. One family even evicted over a backyard tool shed. It made me realize how many folks are trapped in neighborhoods where 1 or 2 people abuse the system and hide behind paperwork. But they don't fight back because they don't know how, or they think it's too risky. That's exactly what my HOA president had counted on. But her car wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth. After a few more weeks, the interim HOA board reached out. They wanted to meet, not in secret, not behind closed doors, but publicly in the community clubhouse. This time, the vibe was completely different. No stern faces, no crossed arms, just regular people trying to rebuild what had been broken. They asked if I'd be willing to help revise the neighborhood guidelines. I was hesitant at first. I hadn't done any of this for attention, but I agreed as long as everything was transparent. No private fines, no surprise inspections, no parking drama. We sat down and rewrote the whole system from scratch. Homeowners had input. We had open votes. Rules were simplified. The number of citations being issued dropped almost immediately. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in years, the HOA felt like a support system, not a trap. One afternoon during that process, I saw a flatbed truck pull up in front of my driveway. I figured it was finally happening. 2 guys got out, looked at the concrete, then looked at the car. One of them whistled low and said she wasn't kidding. I asked if she had sent them. Yeah, the driver said, but we told her it's not safe to lift. Wheels are buried. Chassis, too, close to the slab. She'd need a full team and a permit for this. They left, SUV still in place. And still, no word from her. After that, nobody really expected the car to move. People started using it as a landmark. Where 3 houses down from the concrete car became an actual direction. Someone even stuck a plastic flamingo on the roof one weekend. I left it there. At that point, it didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like a story. Something real. Something earned. Not petty, just proof. Proof that one person standing their ground can knock down a whole crooked system. And for every person who had ever felt powerless in their own neighborhood, this driveway was a small reminder that the rules don't always win. Sometimes the concrete does. About a month later, I got a letter in the mail, not from her, but from her lawyer. Again, it was short, cold, almost robotic. It stated that unless I allowed reasonable access to retrieve personal property, I could be liable for loss or damages. This time, though, there was no threat of a lawsuit, no mention of police, just a quiet, desperate attempt to end what she had started. I took a deep breath, then picked up the phone. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter and got the receptionist. I told her who I was and why I was calling. A minute later, the lawyer got on the line. He didn't waste time. My client would like to recover her vehicle. I paused and said, "That's her car in my driveway, still cemented into the ground." "Yes, sir." She acknowledges the situation now and would prefer a peaceful resolution. I let the silence hang before I answered. Good. Then I assume she's ready to admit she trespassed. He hesitated, then said, "She's willing to cover removal costs and sign a non-disclosure agreement." That made me laugh out loud. "You think I want to keep this quiet?" He didn't answer. "I'll make it simple," I continued. "I'll agree to removal, but only if she shows up in person, apologizes for trespassing, and signs a written resignation that permanently bars her from holding any HOA position again. Ever. No NDAs. No cover-up. All public." He went quiet again, then sighed. "I'll get back to you." That was the last I heard from them. The car stayed. Summer crept in. Grass grew around the edges of the slab. Neighbors started planting flowers near it, turning the whole thing into a strange but oddly charming part of the landscape. One family even hosted a block party, and they set up a drink cooler right next to the car. People posed for pictures with it. Nobody saw it as an eyesore anymore. It had become a symbol. One evening, I walked outside and saw something that caught me off guard. Luis, the same guy who helped lead the recall, was kneeling next to the car, painting a small wooden sign. When he stood up and backed away, I saw what it said. "Don't park where you don't belong." He gave me a look and shrugged. Figured it fit. I didn't stop him. At the next community meeting, someone brought up the SUV, not complain, but to ask if we should vote on whether it should stay. That made me laugh harder than anything. I told them I wasn't trying to create a monument. I just wanted peace, and I got it. But that's the thing. What was once just a car now stood for something bigger. Not revenge. Not payback. Just the idea that boundaries matter. That when someone crosses a line over and over again, eventually, they get stuck on the wrong side of it. Some neighbors even joked about turning it into a community garden. Others offered to pay for mosaic tiles to cover the concrete and turn it into art. I didn't say yes or no. I just listened, quietly amazed at what started as a power struggle had become a community talking point. That HOA had made people feel powerless for so long. Now they were planting things, painting things, speaking up in meetings, laughing together. They weren't scared anymore. That car didn't just get in her way. It got her out of the way. One night, I walked out and saw an elderly couple standing near the edge of the driveway, looking at the SUV. I knew their house was just around the corner. I hadn't spoken to them much before. The man turned to me and said, "We lived here 20 years. Never thought anyone would stand up to her." His wife smiled and added, "It's nice to see the neighborhood waking up again." And then they walked on, quiet and content. I stood there for a while, looking at the concrete, the wheels, the way it had all settled into place. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about reminding everyone. Sometimes the most powerful message is the one you don't have to shout. You just have to build it, so it can't be moved. The weeks kept rolling by, and still, the SUV stayed frozen in its spot. It was no longer just a vehicle. It was history poured into concrete. Everyone knew the story now. Even the mail carriers started cracking jokes about making it a historic landmark. At first, I thought people would get tired of it. I expected them to want it gone eventually. But that never happened. Instead, the car became the one thing in the neighborhood nobody wanted to change. Funny how that works. I started noticing how things were different, beyond just the car. The new HOA board wasn't made up of power-hungry people trying to run a neighborhood like a kingdom. It was folks you could actually talk to, people who would stop mid-walk to say, "Hey, do you think this rule still makes sense?" Instead of sending violation letters, they knocked on doors and asked for input. The woman who'd been fined for her sunflowers, they named her to the landscaping committee. The man who once got cited for his work van, he now helps organize community garage sales. Real people were finally running things and doing it right. I didn't attend every meeting, but when I did, I noticed something else. There was no fear anymore. No stiff silence. No darting glances. People asked questions without feeling like they were stepping out of line. You could hear laughter in the room. Real laughter, not the forced kind that comes with holding your breath. That wasn't because of a vote or a petition. It was because someone stood still when everyone else used to move aside. One afternoon, a city inspector showed up, asking about the car. Someone must have reported it anonymously. The man was polite, clipboard in hand. He asked for the story, and I gave him the short version: trespassing, ignored warnings, legal boundary lines. He walked the perimeter, checked the tags on the vehicle, and nodded. "Well," he said, "it's not a code violation if it's on your property and hasn't been abandoned. Do you want it removed?" I looked at him for a second before answering. "No." He tilted his head. "Mind if I ask why?" I smiled. "Because it's the first time people started talking to each other again." He didn't ask any more questions. Just gave me a half smile and walked off. That's the kind of understanding you don't need to explain. That evening, I was watering the lawn when a teenager from a few houses down came walking up. He looked awkward, like he didn't know whether to speak or just keep walking. But then he stopped and pointed at the SUV. "Did you really pour the concrete yourself?" he asked. I nodded. "All 6 bags." He let out a low whistle. "That's kind of badass." I laughed. "I guess it was." He stood there for a second, then asked, "Why didn't you just call a tow truck?" I shrugged. "Because sometimes people need to be reminded where the line is. And if they won't see it, you draw it in stone." He didn't say anything after that. Just nodded, like he understood something deeper than he expected, then walked off. Over time, things kept changing. People planted more flowers. Sidewalk chalk drawings appeared on weekends. Porch lights stayed on a little later. Kids rode their bikes without nervous parents standing at the curb watching every move. There was life again, and that slab of concrete, with its rust-stained tires and that same white SUV frozen in place, never stopped saying what needed to be said. No one made a big deal out of it. No speeches. No plaques. Just quiet respect. Even the neighbors who didn't agree with how it went down never questioned who was in the right anymore. They didn't have to. The proof was there every time they turned the corner. And every time I stood out on the porch, watching it all unfold, I could feel it in the air. That shift, that slow reclaiming of space, of voice, of simple peace. All from a single decision to stop moving backward and stand your ground, no matter how heavy the weight might seem. A little over 2 months after the whole thing started, I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea when I saw a familiar black sedan pull up across the street. I didn't need to squint. I knew exactly who it was. She stepped out slowly, carefully dressed like she was heading into a courtroom instead of her old neighborhood. Same stiff posture, same expression like she was doing everyone a favor just by being present. But this time, there was no clipboard in her hand. No HOA badge hanging from a lanyard. Just her, standing alone, staring at the car she had once insisted belonged on my driveway. She stood there for a while, not moving. I watched as she walked a slow circle around the vehicle, hands clasped in front of her like she was examining a crime scene. The concrete still held everything in place. The laminated letter I had taped to the windshield was gone now, faded away by time and sun. But the meaning? Still there, stronger than ever. Eventually, she turned toward me. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just waited. She made her way across the street, careful with every step, like she was approaching something she didn't trust. When she reached the edge of the driveway, she stopped just outside the line where the concrete changed color from my driveway to the slab that held her SUV. She looked at the spot, then up at me. Her voice was softer than I expected. I didn't think you'd really do it. I raised an eyebrow. Then you didn't know me. She gave a dry smile, the kind people force when they're not used to admitting they were wrong. You made your point. I wasn't trying to make a point, I replied. I was trying to protect what was mine. There was a long pause. A breeze moved through the street, and I could hear wind chimes down the block. She opened her mouth a few times but said nothing. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a single piece of paper. She walked forward and handed it to me. It was a notarized letter, stamped and signed. Her official resignation from the HOA, dated 2 weeks earlier, with a clause stating she would never seek a leadership position in any neighborhood association again. No fluff, no excuses, just facts. I never sent it to you directly, she said, but I should have. I looked it over, then folded it in half and set it on the table beside me. Why now? I asked. She looked back at the SUV. Because I thought ignoring it would make it go away. But it didn't. It just made things worse. I nodded once. That tends to happen when you bury the truth under concrete. Her eyes flicked back to mine. I want to remove the car. The right way. I'll cover the cost. No lawyers, no threats. I didn't respond right away. I just let her words hang in the air, watching her shift uncomfortably like she expected me to snap back. But I didn't. Not this time. Finally, I said, then show up with a crew. Do it during the day. Let everyone see it. No hiding. She hesitated, then gave a quiet nod. All right. Then she turned and left. By the following Saturday, a construction team arrived. Professional, clean-cut guys. They roped off the area, brought saws, chisels, and gear for breaking the slab without damaging the driveway. The whole process took hours. People came out and watched, like a crowd gathering for a ceremony they never expected to see. And when they finally lifted the SUV out and loaded it onto a flatbed, the empty space it left behind didn't feel like something had been taken away. It felt like something had been earned. No speeches were made. No apologies shouted from rooftops. But in the small group of neighbors watching from their porches, you could feel it. That quiet nod of respect. That deep breath of closure. That understanding that someone, somewhere, had stood up when nobody else wanted to. And when I looked down at that rough patch of broken concrete, I didn't see damage. I saw where change had started. The patch where the SUV once sat didn't stay empty for long. I thought about repaving it right away, cleaning it up, smoothing it out, making it look like nothing ever happened. But every time I looked at that rough outline of broken concrete, I felt something different. Not frustration, not mess, just memory. So I left it as it was. Neighbors kept stopping by that week. Some just to say hi. Some to ask what I planned to do with the spot. A few offered to help re-pour the concrete if I wanted to make it clean again. But every single one of them ended the conversation the same way, with a quiet nod, a smile, or a thanks for standing your ground. I didn't say much in return. I didn't need to. The cracked patch said enough. Later that month, Luis came by again. He'd been walking the block, clipboard in hand, but not the kind of clipboard she used to carry. He was taking a community survey. Real questions, like what events would you like to see, and any ideas to improve the neighborhood? It felt strange, almost unreal, to see the HOA doing things people actually wanted. We sat on the porch for a while, sipping lemonade, talking about the changes. He told me there hadn't been a single violation letter sent in over 30 days. That was a record. People had stopped reporting each other for things like leaving a garden hose out or having mismatched patio chairs. Instead, they started helping each other, offering paint, tools, or even just time. He glanced toward the driveway and said, "That spot right there? It's where everything turned around." I didn't argue. A few days later, a little girl from down the street came up to me while I was trimming hedges. She looked about 10, holding a cup of juice and dragging a stuffed rabbit behind her. "Is that where the bad car was?" she asked, pointing at the concrete. I smiled. "Yep, that's the spot." She squinted at it for a second, then said, "My mom said you save a neighborhood." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just knelt down and said, "I just wanted people to be able to use their driveways again." She giggled and skipped off, juice sloshing over the rim of her cup. And just like that, it hit me. This story, this weird and wild chapter of concrete and conflict, it wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the street, to the people, to the quiet ones who had stayed silent, because they thought no one would back them up. Now they had proof that someone would. That weekend, a few families put together a cookout on the cul-de-sac. It wasn't formal. No flyers. Just one neighbor mentioning to another, and suddenly grills were being rolled out, folding chairs popped open, and kids were running through sprinklers again. Someone even brought a small speaker and started playing old school hits from the 90s. The patch in the driveway, it became the dance floor. A couple of kids tried to skateboard over it, jumping off the raised edge like a ramp. Others turned it into chalk art. One drew a superhero standing on top of a car, wearing a cape and holding a giant bag of cement. Someone else drew a big red X on one corner with the word "respect" written underneath. No one erased it, not even me. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and people packed up their coolers, I sat on my porch and watched the last few kids race down the street on scooters. For the first time in a long while, the block felt like a community again, not just a row of houses stuck under the rule of a power-hungry board. And all it had taken was one car, one decision, and the guts to say enough. That slab of cracked concrete wasn't a reminder of what went wrong. It was proof of what could go right, when someone decides to stop letting the wrong people win. And whether anyone knew it or not, that old patch of driveway had already become something more than pavement. It had become a turning point.